took my girl to Cedar Point to sea. She got stuck on Cedar Point and wouldn't come home with me.
Today it's known for record-setting roller coasters. But in earlier times we might have come for a picnic or a day at the beach.
Some days on a weekend, it would be so crowded, you could hardly see the sand. There'd be so many people there.
Since 1870, millions of Americans have traveled to Cedar Point for summer fun.
To this day, people pull out photos for us of their grandparents at Cedar Point in 1910 or 1914. So many people said, I met my wife there, I met my husband there. And this goes back to the 20s, the 30s, the 40s.
One of the few surviving examples from the golden age of summer resorts, Cedar Point has endured world wars, depression, and changing times.
People that visit the park can reminisce and remember what Cedar Point was as far back as their families go.
Cedar Point Memories presents a nostalgic journey through the remarkable 125-year history of one of the world's most enduring amusement parks.
It's just in my roots. I walked there when it was dirt, before there were sidewalks. You could go and take the ferry and eat, see friends, and now I take my grandkids.
Funding for Cedar Point Memories was provided in part by a grant from Society National Bank, a Key Corp bank. Additional funding was provided by Johnson & Higgins Unison, providing real-world solutions for risk management, employee benefits, and business insurance programs. Additional funding was also provided by the supporting members of WBGU-TV.
Grandpa, wake up!
What?
Wake up!
What's that?
Wake up, Grandpa!
Oh, Billy, what are you so excited about?
Dad says we're all going to Cedar Point soon.
Well, that's worth getting excited about.
Yeah, but I wish we could go today.
Why don't we?
Right now?
Certainly.
But how will we get there?
We'll make believe. Cedar Point fun is an adventure of the mind, too. We just close our eyes and think of all the fun we've had there. Imagine ourselves at Cedar Point.
Can we really do that?
Just believe in what fun can do, Billy. Fun can do, Billy. Fun can do, Billy.
In 1995, Cedar Point marks its 125th anniversary, making it the third oldest park existing today. Located in Sandusky, Ohio, it is consistently rated as one of America's top amusement parks. Annual attendance surpasses 3 million in a season lasting only 4 months. Modern Cedar Point has built its reputation on its record-setting 11 roller coasters. More than 6 miles of coaster track wind through, around, and above the park's 364 acres. Each year, rides seem to move quicker, stretch farther, and go higher than ever before, and growing attendance figures attest to the allure of each innovation. When it comes to being entertained, our appetite for the new and improved usually seems stronger than our devotion to the tried and true. But in our hearts and minds, we still manage to keep the old favorites around.
The rocket ships didn't do anything except go up in the air and go round and round. But they were very sleek, and they looked something like Buck Rogers. It was like flying. You actually got up in the air and soared over the trees, and we thought it was pretty big stuff.
The funnest thing I've ever seen was a sailor with his hat on in there, and his hat was sticking to the wall, and his pants were riding up, and it was just the funniest thing I've ever seen. When you come out, you felt a little bit like you've been inside of something, and you kind of wanted something inside you to maybe be out.
They had actual people run with guns towards the train, and we had to shoot them, and, and we did a pretty good job, I think. We got them all the bad guys.
There were no seat belts in those days, and it threw me forward, and the wooden seat was stuck to my pants, and I was able to look down and look at the rails underneath the seat. I didn't ride it too often because it was a wicked ride.
Each generation coming to Cedar Point has had its favorite attractions and challenging rides. And sometimes just the mention of the old names can bring a smile, like the Jumbo Jet, the Bubble Bounce, the Wild Mouse, the Caterpillar, the Yankee Bullet, and the Bug. Yes, the rides have come and gone over the years, but the memories last, maybe even getting a little better with time. And why not? In our memories, there are no lines to stand in. The French fries can't make us any fatter. And best of all, those memories put us back with old friends and family. Because while the rides and attractions have changed, the essence of the Cedar Point experience has not. From the beginning, it has always been an escape from the concerns of everyday life, an escape we've made together. Long before there was a Midway, hunters sought the first game at Cedar Point, while fishermen could be found living in shacks here during the fishing season. Through the mid-19th century, Cedar Point was an isolated peninsula. Located in Lake Erie, just north of the city of Sandusky, it took its name from the cedar trees that once covered the area. In 1870, entrepreneurs began providing the adventurous with crude facilities to enjoy the point's natural resources. From the start, the main attraction was the beach. An editor for the Sandusky Register boasted, "There is no finer place for bathing in the world. The beach is broad with the finest and whitest sand. The bottom of the lake is smooth as a house floor and slopes gradually to any desired depth of water." As word of the beach spread, a larger, more permanent bathhouse was built to accommodate the growing crowds. In 1888, the Grand Pavilion was constructed by the Cedar Point Pleasure Resort Company. Originally bordered on three sides by a large porch, the building also had an open observation tower. Now visitors could relax in a touch of elegance and enjoy the cool lake breezes. From the porch, one could watch those more daring ride the new water toboggan into the breakers below, or farther out, see would-be acrobats swing on the water trapeze. The porch also afforded an excellent view of open-air vaudeville shows, or a chance to hear an evening concert from the nearby music pavilion. Because the Grand Pavilion served alcoholic beverages, a ladies' pavilion was added to provide more wholesome refreshments. In 1892, Cedar Point installed the Switchback Railway, a forerunner of the modern roller coaster. A gravity ride, riders traveled down a series of small hills. At the end, the car was switched back to another track for a return trip. Although patronage increased with each improvement, Cedar Point suffered financially. Facing an uncertain future, the company eventually turned to an aggressive businessman from Indiana named George Arthur Beckling.
George Arthur Beckling was an extraordinary man. He came to Cedar Point in 1897 with no knowledge of the resort industry at all. Within 10 years, he turned Cedar Point into one of the greatest resorts in the United States and was himself a millionaire. He was one of perhaps 12 men in the United States who really founded the summer resort industry and led the way.
One of Beckling's first improvements was the addition of hotels on the point, including the White House in 1901. Along the beach, he extended the boardwalk to a length of 1,000 feet. In 1902, a more advanced roller coaster called the Racer was put in, not far from the bathhouse. For a nickel, riders could jam into one of the 11 cars. From there, they climbed to a thrilling 46-foot height before racing around the double tracks. Along with all of the new construction, more attention was now given to landscaping the point.
In the early years, Cedar Point had little or no grass, mainly because it was covered with sand. George Beckling decided that it would be nice to landscape the area around the Grand Pavilion. So one of the things he did was to bring in dirt and then plant trees, shrubs, and grass. The problem was how to handle mowing all this lawn every week during the summer months. His solution initially was to bring in a herd of sheep, which he turned loose, and hopefully they would eat all the grass. It wasn't the most successful thing in the world, and the sheep didn't last very long. They eventually went somewhere else.
In 1904, Beckling literally changed the point itself. He had a series of lagoons dredged and opened to the water of Lake Erie. His intention was to import a fleet of Venetian gondolas to operate on the new waterways. Although the gondolas never appeared, the lagoons did become a favorite with recreational boaters. That same year, Beckling purchased statuary made for the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. The statuary became a permanent feature at Cedar Point. The Crystal Rock Castle was built not far from where the main Midway ends today. Named for the local brand of beer it sold, it was memorable for its unique castle-like appearance. New construction continued into 1905 with the building of the Hotel Breakers. While previous accommodations had offered no more than 60 rooms, the Hotel Breakers started with 600. Later additions would bring that total to 1,000. At its center was a circular rotunda 5 stories high. The inside of the rotunda was opened with balconies on each floor. The ground level was polished wood covered with wicker furniture. The hotel's wings were angled so that each room could have a lake view. A covered walkway led to an extended porch on the beach. Clearly, the Hotel Breakers embodied Beckling's desire to develop a first-class resort.
George Beckling spent a great deal of money to make sure it would be the grandest hotel that could be constructed. He engaged some notable Cleveland architects to do the design. He also brought in things like Austrian furniture, Louis Tiffany's chandeliers and windows, and also put a lot more into the hotel than you would expect to find in the average hotel, such as barbershop, beauty shop, a Western Union telegraph station, and so forth. So that what he built was a first-class hotel that rivaled the hotels of Atlantic City.
Over the years, the hotel would welcome many notable guests, including 6 U.S. presidents. But even as it opened, another large-scale project was already in the works. 2 stories high, 150 feet wide, and as long as a football field, the Coliseum continued Beckling's philosophy of thinking big. On the bottom floor was the Ratskeller, where beer and wine were sold. The top floor was advertised as the largest dancing pavilion on the Great Lakes. Over the years, the Coliseum would become perhaps the most recognizable landmark at Cedar Point. As big as the Coliseum and Hotel Breakers were, the biggest change came with the addition of an amusement area before the 1906 season. A $10,000 carousel was installed where rides could be had 1 for a nickel and 6 for a quarter. And now visitors could see the jungles of Cedar Point on a new miniature steam railway. This film, shot some years later, reveals that a miniature village was hidden deep within the jungles.
I remember they had to put a tall smokestack on it so that the smoke didn't come back in the man that was running its face or the people that were riding on the train. But it was a favorite ride of all the little kids. I remember that very well.
The amusement circle, as it was first known, was actually a half circle that ran from the boat landing on one side of Cedar Point to the beach on the other. Along the way, a souvenir picture gallery invited all to look pleasant, come in, and don't break the glass. While a sign on the bowling alley reminded the undecided that a bowler never gets appendicitis. And if not knowing the future proved a burden, you could always have your hand read by a scientific Egyptian palmist. Would-be pilots could ride the circle swing, described as the nearest successful approach to the airship, while future sailors had a trip to Rockaway, a simulated boat ride. And for those who didn't make it to the jungles on the miniature railway, there was even a wild animal show.
When George Beckling decided to put an amusement park in, he did it only because he knew it would make money. Actually, he didn't like amusement parks, and he really thought it would give a shabby appearance to Cedar Point. So he put it in strictly as a business venture. In reality, when he did advertising or produced a brochure, he didn't even mention that he had an amusement park here.
With the amusement circle, Cedar Point was now comparable to other great resorts of the era, like Coney Island and Atlantic City. Billing itself as the queen of American watering places, Cedar Point soon attracted visitors from all around the Great Lakes. Steamers from Cleveland and Detroit began regular service to the point. Beckling spent $25,000 to build a pier just to handle the larger ships. The crowds they brought helped make Cedar Point an overwhelming financial success.
Cedar Point probably never would have become what it was if steamship travel had not been available. Now, originally, there were no roads to Cedar Point. Therefore, you had to get here by water. So either you came from Sandusky on a boat, or you sailed from Cleveland, Detroit, Toledo, or even further away by steamship. You have to understand that on given days, as many as 8,000 people would step off of steamships onto Cedar Point.
Interurban railways like the Lakeshore Electric brought people from Toledo, Cleveland, and towns in between.
The electric railway, the interurban, came from Cleveland and from elsewhere and actually deposited people in Sandusky ready for a steamship trip to Cedar Point. And maybe even more importantly, steam railways booked excursions into Sandusky, specifically for the purpose of taking people to Cedar Point. The steam trains came right down to the docks on Water Street in Sandusky, and on a busy day, there were virtually lines of trains letting people off and later putting people back on for their trips back.
From Sandusky, passengers boarded one of the several ferry boats serving the point. On June 26, 1909, G.A. Beckling and a large christening party welcomed the newest of these ships, the G.A. Beckling. Costing $120,000, the Beckling had a capacity of 2,000 passengers. With 2 pilot houses, the steamer saved time by never turning around. Over the next 40 years, the Beckling would become a familiar sight on the bay. Once let off at Cedar Point, visitors were offered a growing list of things to do. Between the Grand Pavilion and the Hotel Breakers, a vaudeville theater was kept busy offering 2 shows a day, and concert bands were a regular feature. But as well attended as these attractions were, the beach still drew the biggest crowds. Sometimes there were so many swimmers, they would have to take turns in the water.
I thought it was so strange that they blew the whistle, and my Aunt Cora said, well, that means everybody gets out of the water and we go in. And then they blew the whistle again and we had to get out, and more people went in. It was like taking turns.
As the number of bathers increased, the bathhouse expanded several times, eventually covering 4 acres of sand. With 1,000 small changing rooms, Cedar Point claimed the largest bathhouse in the country.
Our bathing suits were so crazy. We had to wear such big suits. There were bloomers like in a big midi top with long sleeves. That's what the women had to wear. And the men's suits were, I don't know whether it was a 1-piece or 2-piece, but I remember that they were crazy outfits.
Maybe even more popular than a chance to swim in the Lake Erie Breakers was watching from the elevated boardwalk, especially when a contraption called the Sea Swing was installed offshore. That could always be counted on for a chuckle or two.
A circular swing that people sat on little chairs, and it had a little gasoline engine. When it was turned on, the swings would swing out over the water.
The Sea Swing was sort of scary to me, but I liked to watch the others. They were all having so much fun.
If people actually hit the water, their bathing suits would fill with water, and occasionally the bathing suit would come flying off.
If people watching was your thing, then wandering up and down the boardwalk became a must when visiting Cedar Point. It was the place to see and be seen. You might even see an animal or two along the way. At night, strollers might stop to watch a brilliant fireworks show out over the water. The sand sculptors were always guaranteed to attract a crowd along the boardwalk. Their creations were elaborate, if only temporary. On August 31st, 1910, pioneer aviator Glenn Curtis landed his Albany Flyer right on the sand at Cedar Point. Using tire inner tubes as a life jacket, Curtis had flown 65 miles across Lake Erie from Euclid Beach in Cleveland. An enthusiastic George Beckling congratulated Curtis on what was then a world's record for flying over water. The event created such a sensation that aerial exhibitions and airplane rides became a regular feature at Cedar Point. Two student lifeguards made history of another kind in 1913. Knut Rockne and Gus DeRay spent their off hours perfecting a little-used football play called the forward pass. The play would help catapult Notre Dame into national prominence and Rockne into legend. Rockne was just one of many college and high school students working seasonally at the resort. Due to its growing size, Cedar Point required a large influx of employees for only a short time. This led to the yearly tradition of seeking out students from schools throughout the Midwest. The top full-time employee was without a doubt George Beckling. After becoming majority owner, he renamed the Cedar Point Resort Company the G.A. Beckling Company in 1917. And now a millionaire, Beckling looked forward confidently to a prosperous future for himself and Cedar Point. By the 1920s, Cedar Point was drawing enough people to support the operation of 3 roller coasters. Joining the racer were the Leap the Dips coaster installed in 1912 and the Leapfrog Scenic Railway, which made its debut in 1917. Clayton Wisely remembers riding the Scenic Railway in 1921. It was the first time his family had ever seen a roller coaster, and it looked like a good way to see the sights.
I think Dad took us on that about the first thing we got there. He liked to look around and see everything from high points, and we went up and the ride was slow and smooth, and Dad was looking all around and, oh, this is wonderful. He just got a good start and we went whoosh, and that was the last anybody said anything. Everybody grabbed until we got around all the circles and up and down, and we got off. My mother was kind of a German background woman. I can still see her stomping off. I don't know why Papa had to take us on that thing. I don't think Dad even thought about going down like that, and yet he had seen it, but anyway, it wasn't like he expected, I don't think, or I don't think he'd have taken us on.
Many families, like the Wisleys, made their first visit to Cedar Point with the advent of the automobile. In 1914, a 7-mile road called the Chaussee was opened along the peninsula. From then on, families could drive directly to the resort. Although the road suffered from the harsh Lake Erie weather, the number of people arriving by car grew steadily. By the mid-20s, single-day visits became the most typical way to visit Cedar Point. At first, parking was limited to small lots around the rides. When more space was needed, cars were diverted to some of the wooded areas. Here a crew attempts to coordinate traffic while poised to block the way of any renegade motorist. Sound familiar? As single-day visits became the norm, Cedar Point began to feel more like an amusement park and less like a resort. Oh, the beach remained as busy as ever. But increasingly, people came just to wander the Midway. Some were lured by the games of chance. And who wouldn't be tempted to risk 10 cents to win an electric-eyed teddy bear or an electric boudoir lamp doll? For many, the day wasn't complete without a meal in the picnic grove.
You could leave your picnic basket there and the blankets and everything and go and swim and come back and it'd be there. Even if it was in the sun, sometimes people would pull it over into the shade for you. So it was really a good atmosphere. We trusted everybody.
For the younger set, a kiddie land was opened in 1924. It featured perennial favorites like the Seesaw and the Slide. Starting in 1925, older kids could play in a novelty called Noah's Ark. If there was ever a unique concept, this was it.
You went up an incline, and there was a pond of water about 2 or 3 inches thick with lily pads about this big that you had to step in the center, and as you went across, you got to the steps that went up. If you didn't step in the center, you got a wet foot. In the pilot house, Noah was there. Now the wooden figures that were on the outside of the ark rocked back and forth with the boat, and they had fish lines. One was named Ham, which was supposed to be the son of Noah, but it was a fun ride. Yeah, it wasn't really a ride, it was just an experience.
For a thrilling experience, nothing topped the Cyclone roller coaster. Installed near the beach in 1929, the ride towered over all others when it came to excitement.
When you would drive to Cedar Point on the chaussee, you knew you were getting close when you could see the roller coaster.
In 1929, Cedar Point made their last contribution of the old Cedar Point era to the Midway, and that was the Cyclone roller coaster. And during its years of survival at Cedar Point, 1929 to 1950, was probably the greatest ride installed ever at Cedar Point through that time period.
That ride up that long, long hill was, to me, it struck terror into me. But I had to do it. And so when you started down, and some people stood up, and I never did. I always felt that maybe it would be my last act on earth or something. And when you got off, and you say, "How was it?" And it's okay. It's okay. No big deal, you know. Although you're shaking all the time.
Well, it just that it threw you around tremendously. Today they call it G-forces, and in those days they didn't know what it meant. It was just plain wild, and a lot of people came off rather bruised up.
The Cyclone was notorious for being rough. It featured some steeply banked turns. It was fast, and many of the operators said every day they could walk under the ride and find anything from coins and fountain pens to false teeth and wigs.
Probably, unless you really like to beat yourself up, you didn't ride it too often.
In spite of the excitement of the Cyclone, the Great Depression proved to be an even rougher ride for Cedar Point in the 1930s. George Beckling's death in 1931 only served to underscore the end of Cedar Point's golden years. People still kept coming, but the crowds grew smaller and spent less. And while expansion once was the hallmark of the Beckling years, management now struggled just to keep things going.
You would have noticed weeds growing in the flower gardens. You would have noticed cracks in the cement walkways. You would have noticed buildings that were badly in need of paint, and some that were so rotted that people said they were only held together by paint. These are a lot of things that George Beckling wouldn't have tolerated, but the people who followed him had no choice because there really was no money during the 1930s to improve Cedar Point or even maintain it.
One investment that was made came in 1939 when the second floor of the Coliseum was renovated. Most recently a skating rink, the entire floor was converted into an Art Deco ballroom. Cedar Point hoped to cash in on the big band craze then sweeping the country. An immediate success, NBC was soon carrying live radio broadcasts from Cedar Point. George Mayer, who emceed at the ballroom in the early 60s, recalls the view from the stage.
It was a marvelous feeling just standing up there on this bandstand looking out over the audience, all dressed up for the occasion, because at that time, you know, young people and even those that were much older would always dress up with sport coats or suits and nice dresses to come and watch a big band perform. They would gather around the bandstand oftentimes and just watch the band perform and just listen. And then of course, they would enjoy dancing as well. But it was very exciting just to sit up there on stage, be up there, be part of this, and just look out over the ballroom floor and see all these people enjoying themselves immensely.
It would really give you a thrill just before they would, open the curtain, and whatever band would hit a big note back behind the curtain, and it just gave you chills. It was really a neat thing to do.
Probably
in our memory of being teenagers and so on, that's probably the outstanding memory, is our experiences with the big bands and coming over to the ballroom.
At its height, the ballroom was open 7 nights a week and Saturday afternoons, and the revenue it generated was critical to Cedar Point's survival. Also important during this time was the continued patronage of nearby communities. The war years of the early 40s did bring an improved economy, but they also brought rationing and travel restrictions. Eventually, the Big Lake steamers and railways could no longer be counted on to bring crowds from cities like Cleveland and Detroit. As it had decades earlier, Cedar Point would depend on the people from Sandusky and the surrounding areas to keep operating. Now, second and third generations of families were in the habit of coming to the point. To many, Cedar Point was like a second home or a city park, somewhere to wander when you had a little time. When the war ended, Cedar Point was worse for the wear, but still standing. Even after years of financial hardship, the rides were running. And if they didn't shine quite as much, it really didn't matter to the young at heart.
As soon as we got off the boat, we headed for the rides.
The octopus, the tilt-a-whirl, flying scooters, the bug. These were some of the exotic names enticing young riders on the Midway.
It was exciting to us because we didn't know anything different. We didn't have television and seen everything and heard everything and so forth. We thought it was really something. It was a real world-class place to be. I think that often we spent as much time probably deciding how we were going to spend our limited funds as we did anything else.
Ask someone today to remember a favorite ride from these years, and they'll probably tell you the Caterpillar.
It just went around in a circle with cars that had a canvas cover over it. So as soon as it got going, then the cover came over it, and it looked like a big caterpillar that went around and over hills and so forth, except that when the cover came, then it was dark. And so that was fairly scary. You were going up and down and around and around and in the dark, and the girls would always scream and so forth. And so we considered that a pretty exciting ride.
In the days before special effects, the Eden Musée Wax Museum could be strangely captivating, especially in the Chamber of Horrors.
When you went to buy the ticket, you usually stood in line, and after you've been there a couple of seconds, you realized that the people that you were in line with were wax figures. So you had to go around them, and when you went in, they had a lot of things in their Dillinger's electrocution. They had the Diane Quinns in there, and what used to scare people, especially older people, when they'd walk along and not look, they had a wax figure of an old scrub woman on the floor, and guys would stumble over it and excuse themselves to the woman. One was of a woman, a midwife in New York, putting a little newborn baby into a coal-fired stove with the mother in the neighboring room, horrified, seeing what's happening. One of the most horrible looking ones was a man that had apparently gone into a coma, and they thought he was dead, and they buried him. And then when they dug him up, he had tried to get out, and it was really a horrible impression that they made of that face. His eyes were wide open, and his hands were bloody, and he'd scratched himself and all, and it was massive blood. It was kind of a sickening sight in those days. Kids nowadays wouldn't be too disturbed with it.
If you still had an appetite after a good scare, a stop at Berardi's French fried potato stand might be in order. Probably the best known of all the family-run concessions, Mama Berardi's fries were worth every penny. Speaking of pennies, the circular penny arcade was always a good choice for a game of skee-ball or other intrigues.
You could buy postcards of girls in bathing suits. The bathing suits had considerably more material than they do in today, but we thought that was pretty. We wouldn't have dared to take them home, but we thought it was a wonderful place.
My husband heard at work that the beach was open, and we decided to go. We hadn't been anywhere for all during the war years because of rationing, my husband's job, and our big family. And finally we were able to get 2 new tires, so we thought, well, we'd try it. Well, the kids were simply stunned when they saw the water. They were noisy. They just point here and there, and they were really excited. And then when we got to the beach, why, they were just overjoyed, I guess. They'd never been close to the lake or seen anything like it, so it was completely new to them. They were afraid a little bit. But then there were other children there, and they were running around and such, and it didn't take hours long to be doing the same thing.
Before leaving, Dolores's children decided they wanted their own special souvenir.
They weren't ready to go home. They wanted the sand, so they decided they were going to take some home. They knew that there were some bags in the car, and they were going to fill the bags, which they did. My husband had them first make a sandbox for it, and they just hoarded it. They could play in their other dirt, but they kept the sand.
A trip to the beach in the 40s didn't have to be as daring as the days of sea swings and airplane rides. Sometimes it was enough to hang out with friends or spy on the neighbors.
It was fun to watch because they look so different in swimsuits and they just in their street dress, that I think that we had a lot of fun being kind but not kind and wondering if we looked as different to them as they did to us.
And for those without much money, you still couldn't beat the cost of a day at the beach.
The beach at the time was free, so really all you had was your quarter for the round trip ride on the boat, and if you wanted to get a cold drink or something like that. Otherwise there was no other expense, and that made it kind of nice. I guess you could relate it to the spring break activities in Florida now. It was something we look forward to in the summer. Usually you had a portable radio and a blanket or a towel along with you. Usually if you were in with a bunch of boys, why the main topic was the girls sunning themselves on the beach.
And the same way for the girls.
Yeah.
If you were a regular visitor to Cedar Point, more often than not your journey began at the Cedar Point Landing in Sandusky. There you boarded the G.A. Beckling, bound for yet another trip across the bay.
She carried all kinds of cargo. She carried the mail back and forth to Cedar Point all the time. She also carried the freight, the food for the restaurants. Anything that Cedar Point didn't make over here themselves went over on the Beckling, including sometimes teams of horses.
For people living nearby, the Beckling was a convenient way to get over to the point. But it is the adventure of the trip that most people remember.
I remember you get on the boat and it would lean towards the dock, and you swear it wouldn't straight up, and then it, you'd straighten up, and once you get out in the water, I mean, it was, just a regular boat.
We thought that the Beckling was probably something comparable to what Mark Twain wrote about on the Mississippi River. We always considered that we were running the boat, and we usually stand right up in the bow, and when we got tired of doing that, we'd go down below and watch them shoveling coal.
The engine room was attractive because it had such huge pistons, and you could see the steam rising.
It was beautiful. It was maintained like a work of art. Very well painted, black and red and green, and then the chrome and the brass parts were kept polishing. It was almost like a mirror. And to watch those big drive arms work those side paddle wheels then and so on, and the smell of the oil,
hot oil,
fuel and so on.
There was an odor of steam and oil that it wasn't exactly a perfume, but it was a pleasant odor that people enjoyed.
It took 20 minutes to get to Cedar Point from Sandusky, and a lot of times people would just sit there or stand next to the rail and look down and watch those engines going around.
It was quite something to do.
You always had to go down there. That was always, you had to just take a quick trip down there and back before you got over.
The pilot, the captain, would stop the engines and come gliding in, and then suddenly they'd throw them into reverse, and it'd just be this whole wash of water and steam, and the lines being secured and so forth, and then they'd put down this big gangplank, and everybody, the whole crowd would just, rush ashore.
If you lived in Sandusky, you didn't have to go to Cedar Point to enjoy a ride on the Beckling.
There was an ice cream store in downtown Sandusky called Isley's. They had the best ice cream bars, and it was a real treat because they had someone selling those ice cream bars on the ferry boat. And I always would remember my parents buying me an Isley ice cream bar.
And sometimes on a hot summer night, when we couldn't sleep, we'd load the family in the car and go down and get on the Beckling, get on the steamer, and ride across the bay over to Cedar Point and back, just in the cool of the evening to cool down before we go to sleep.
At night, it would look so neat to look out there and see this big, it looked like a big birthday cake coming across with all the lights and everything on it.
And they would have an accordion or maybe a three-piece band, and on a real nice quiet night, you could hear the boat coming across the water with the band playing. That used to be quite a thing too. People used to go down the dock and just watch the Beckling go back and forth.
By 1951, new maritime laws and rising costs brought an end to the 42-year run of the Beckling. After sailing more than 300,000 miles back and forth across Sandusky Bay, she made her last run on Labor Day. The following June, she was towed away to Wisconsin to be used as a floating warehouse. And somehow you could feel the ghost of George Beckling himself go with her. The times had changed. Our way of doing things had changed. And now the time had come for Cedar Point itself to change. By the 1950s, it was hard to find much evidence of Cedar Point's glory years. The Cyclone roller coaster was gone, leaving Cedar Point without any coaster at all. The lake pier, once busy with passenger steamships, was now simply Fisherman's Wharf. Even the resort's centerpiece, the Hotel Breakers, had seen better days. Cedar Point found it hard to compete in the age of color television and superhighway vacations. But in the midst of adversity, there were small steps towards survival. In 1952, a new 10-ride Kiddieland was added to the Midway. And in 1955, a new game called Fascination debuted. A mixture of bingo and tic-tac-toe, the game could be, well, fascinating.
My grandmother, for the first time ever in her life, cheated. My grandmother would take a ball from each other person on the other side
I really don't
and roll them up there.
I don't think
she did too.
I don't think she realized it was. I don't think she thought of it as cheating.
Oh yeah.
In 1957, Cedar Point took a giant step in its evolution with the completion of a causeway across Sandusky Bay. The causeway helped alleviate traffic jams on the old Chaussee Road. But more importantly, it attracted the attention of Toledo bond dealer George Roos, who regularly flew over the Cedar Point Peninsula.
He started soon after buying up stock in the G.A. Beckling Company and eventually took control of the company. His intentions, though, were not to develop Cedar Point as a summer resort. He wanted to tear everything down and put in 1,000 ranch-type homes and turn it into a Fort Lauderdale of the North.
Sentiment against closing Cedar Point was strong, even if it no longer was the queen of American watering places. Adults just found it hard to accept that something they had known so long could go away.
There's a feeling of ownership, and I think there are many, many people who come to Cedar Point and who have for many years that feel they own a piece of Cedar Point because they've been attached to it for so long.
Roos and other investors did take over the G.A. Beckling Company, but Cedar Point itself was spared from demolition. The decision was made to turn the facility into a modern amusement park, a Disneyland of the Midwest. This rare film contains some of the last images of old Cedar Point. Tired and worn from years of use, it would end its life empty in the cold of winter. The new Cedar Point would experience a much different fate. Starting in 1959, Cedar Point came alive once again with innovative sights and sounds. Not since the days of George Beckling had so many new attractions been presented to the public. One of the first additions was a small roller coaster-like ride called the Wild Mouse. This was soon joined by the sleek, futuristic monorail. The monorail lasted only a few seasons at Cedar Point. but for a short time it was the most profitable ride on the Midway. The main Midway, with its wide concrete walkways and elaborate floral displays, was a marked contrast to the dirt paths of the old amusement circle. And as if to leave no doubt the times had changed, a massive double Ferris wheel was placed at the front of the Midway.
And it just looked so awesome and mechanical. You just knew you was going to have fun when you got on it. So you was doing the turnaround of the big wheel, but yet you had the flip-flopping of the little ones. And the flip-flopping is where you got the queasies in your little belly, and you just had to go again because, boy, that was great.
The double Ferris wheel was soon joined by another ride that would become a trademark at Cedar Point, the Sky Ride. And innocent families would never again have to ride a roller coaster just to see the sights. Starting in the 60s, one impressive sight on the Midway was the annual gathering of high school bands for opening day.
Band day, opening day at Cedar Point was a lot of fun because there were, I don't know how many bands there were, but it seemed like there were thousands of kids, and there were directors everywhere, and we were up on the beach to play the national anthem and probably some Sousa marches. I really don't remember all that. But then we'd march around the park after we did the initial song. And I remember one guy in the trombone, I played trombone, one guy in the trombone section who was kind of marching along and put his slide right through one of the trash receptacles on the Midway.
The mill race was installed in 1963 and lasted 30 years before being replaced by the Raptor roller coaster. At the time it was built, it was only the second flume ride in the world. 1964 saw the completion of the park's first roller coaster since the cyclone in 1929. Named in honor of Sandusky High School, the Blue Streak was 72 feet high and 2,400 feet long.
And that was like the big thing, oh boy, they're bringing a Blue Streak in. And you've got to ride the Blue Streak because, you know, it's named after us. So we all went over to check out the Blue Streak. And it was like the biggest monster I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, I can still remember the first time I went on. It was the thrill of a lifetime. You know, I mean, it fast, and you flew out of your seat. And it's, well, I'll never forget it. And I think that from that moment on, I just love roller coasters, any kind.
George Beckling's lagoons were put to a new use with the introduction of the Western Cruise riverboat ride. And the Cedar Point and Lake Erie Railroad began carrying its first passengers in 1963. The list of rides and attractions has continued to grow over the last 35 years. Some have come and gone after only a few seasons. Others remain to become the new old favorites, like the Space Spiral, Cedar Downs, and Jungle Larry's Safari Island. In 1968, Frontier Town opened near the site of the old Lake Pier. In addition to its western theme, it featured a second water ride called Shoot the Rapids.
The first trip in any year to Cedar Point was always to find the new ride, the new attraction. Every year was sort of marked with the new ride, and always when you first went over there, that was the first place you stopped, and then you visited your old favorites.
The Cedar Point that stands today bears little resemblance to the Cedar Point of preceding decades.
If we look at the competitors, almost every one of the amusement park competitors of Cedar Point is gone. The parks in Toledo, Cleveland, Detroit, Vermilion, they're all gone. They've long been out of business. So Cedar Point has managed to survive where almost all of its contemporaries failed.
And as the park changes, we hold on to souvenirs, bits and pieces that help us remember something we liked about being there.
These pieces here are carnival glass that were won here at Cedar Point in the year 1912. His uncle won them and gave them to his mother.
We are looking at an ostrich from Noah's Ark, which was founded in 1925. It's now 70 years old. It's a primitive carving. It's built of solid mahogany. The springs in it are brass, and they have the original spring. I have had it at Parkview Barbershop in Sandusky for 23 years, and it's a big attraction to the young kids that come in here. Hi-ho, Sliver.
It's a Webster's notebook, and on page 1 through page 6, this is my story to Cedar Point, 1921.
One of the rarest pieces I think that we've found are sand buckets that were made for the beach. And they're lithographed tin, it says Cedar Point on them. And apparently these, over the years, rusted and were thrown away, so there aren't many out there. Probably one of the tougher things to find in Cedar Point collecting.
This is a paperweight that I found down in Findlay, Ohio from the early 1900s. Early bathing beauty, when the bathing suits were longer and not so revealing.
Well, we've had the passes. 1974, they've started to issue these plastic ones. They did have passes before that, but they were just cardboard. They were $2, and that would just admit you to the park, and you used to have to pay for all the different rides you rode on.
Even with the passing of years, styles, and circumstances, we have always come to Cedar Point for the simple pleasures, to be happy and to see others happy too.
Cedar Point is not really a product. It's something that families really enjoy. I think one of the biggest pleasures I get of working at Cedar Point is walking the Midway, seeing families interact. It's the type of business that a father and son will hold hands when they get off the Magnum or the Mean Streak. And just to walk in the park or to stand at the exits of the stations and watch this love between father and son or father and daughter really is something that makes Cedar Point very, very special.
A lot of times when I come over with my father, we'll just walk around, just enjoy the beach and walk along the boardwalk and Frontier Trail and just be lazy about it, just walk around and enjoy things.
I think the reason that we enjoy coming back to Cedar Point every year is that we've seen our children grow up here, from little tykes going on the kiddie rides to the roller coasters, and they've learned to swim here at the beach at the breakers, and it's just something we look forward to every year. My husband had the idea when we first started coming here and staying at the breakers that there were beautiful statues everywhere, and he said, let's take a picture of the boys when they're small, and every year that we come, just take another picture and see how they get larger than the statues, and it really happened. They were under the statues' arms, and now they're bigger. And it was kind of fun to compare the pictures from year to year and see how much they changed.
And another thing, if you really enjoy people and want to talk, always wear a watch to Cedar Point, because one day I decided I was going to count how many times I was asked the time of day. And that day happened to be one of the biggest. I think 10 times I was asked, ma'am, could you tell me the time? So if you really want to talk to someone, always wear a watch to Cedar Point, and they'll ask you.
And my closest buddy and I had spent the day over here. We were getting ready to leave, and we were walking down towards the beach. We had a couple strings of tickets we wanted to get rid of, and we saw these two pretty young ladies in their bathing suits coming up from the beach, and we stopped them and gave them the tickets. And that was the first time I saw Pat.
He was in the
11th.
And I was very impressed, and very nervous, and he was a big flirt. It just went on from there.
I knew what I was doing.
Choose any year and you'll probably find the same smiles, the same anticipation, the same satisfaction. And when we stop to remember the good old days or to show off a treasured souvenir, we are once again reminded that being at Cedar Point meant being together.
Funding for Cedar Point Memories was provided in part by a grant from Society National Bank, a Key Corp bank. Additional funding was provided by Johnson & Higgins Unison, providing real-world solutions for risk management, employee benefits, and business insurance programs. Additional funding was also provided by the supporting members of WBGU-TV.